So we thought it would be fun to interview each other. I know you'll have a time to get to chat with her during coffee hour after this service, but we're going to do a little back and forth interview. Thank you, Ricky, for videotaping it for anyone who is not here today. So, Kate, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
So good to have you. And would you just tell us a little bit about your ministry so far and some of the highlights of that ministry?
Sure. So I received my call to ministry when I was 15 years old. I grew up in a church that had a cross and flame on the front, but we were probably more Pentecostal in practice. And we went to a Southern Baptist mission camp when I was 15 years old in Jackson, Michigan. And the last night, they had an altar call, as you do. And the boys were told to pray about whether God might be calling them to the ministry. And the girls were told to pray about whether God might be calling us to be pastors' wives. And I came away from that time of prayer very sure that God was calling me to something, and it wasn't being a pastor's wife. So I had the joy of attending Wesley Theological Seminary here in DC eventually, not once but twice. That's another story for another time. But after I graduated from Wesley, I had the joy of serving for a year as a chaplain at both Washington Hospital Center, where I worked in the cardiac ICU and the trauma unit, and at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Ward 8 in DC. Those of you who know St. Elizabeth's by reputation will know that it is a hospital where those with chronic mental illness are treated, as well as those who are coming through DC's prison system for evaluation on fitness to stand trial. So it is a place where our public health system meets our jail system and meets those places where people of color and people who do not have homes all meet. It was a really, really deeply powerful experience, and I only got punched once, which, again, another story for another day. After that, I was commissioned and received the call from the DS, as we do, and I was expecting to be appointed to a church in Prince George's County, and I got the call that I was going to Kensington, and I hung up the phone, and I looked at my husband and I said, "That's rich white people land. Why are they sending me to rich white people land?" But it turned out God and the bishop had a plan that I didn't see at that time. We have had 4 wonderful years together at St. Paul's, and some of my proudest moments there with that congregation have been hosting a series of year-long conversations around intersectionality and how we can be more inclusive of folks across race, class, and gender and sexual identity lines. We became a reconciling congregation in October of 2021 after, again, over a year of hard conversations about what we believe and who we want to be. And the other big achievement that we've had in the last 4 years is taking a renovation project that has been talked about for about 21 years. So this is now a plan that's old enough to drink. And we are finally, this week, receiving our final permits from the county, and we are breaking ground on that renovation on May 9th, which will be just in time for me to get the heck out of Dodge. So perfect timing. I know that you have had 7 wonderful years, 7.5, with the folks at Trinity. So I'm curious, Bonnie, what some of your favorite memories are from your service with these people.
Favorite memories at Trinity. I mean, I think my first go-to is always Sunday morning worship. We've just had some really spirit-filled moments in worship on Sunday mornings. Other highlights have been confirmation classes, all the field trips that we've taken, baptism in swimming pools with teenagers have been a lot of fun. But I think the heart of where I feel joy in my memories with Trinity is right here on Sunday mornings. What do you do for fun?
You mean in my copious spare time? Sorry, right now I'm actually working 2 jobs. The senior pastor at my current church is on a 3-month sabbatical that will end at the end of May. So right now it feels a little bit like I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. In the days when I have free time, Reading and writing are my first passion. I read insanely. I've read 28 books so far this year. The goal is 200. We'll see if I get there. I also love writing, and as part of that, I collect fountain pens and inks. So if you're a pen nerd, come find me. We will be friends.
We have one of those, I know that.
My husband and I are both avid nature photographers, so we really enjoy hiking and taking photos. We'll be taking a trip to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to visit some of our more remote national parks in June and to get to practice that. And my other deep passion and place that I volunteer in the community is fostering. I work with the Fairfax County Animal Shelter where we currently live, and I foster both kittens who've been separated from their mothers, as well as doing fospice, which is foster hospice care for animals that come into the shelter at end of life, which is a really hard and really, really holy place to be. When you know that you are the last person that will care for someone, that's a place that is very, very deep in my heart.
Before you say anything, I just wanted to notice it feels like there are a lot of connections between some of those things you just shared and our congregation here. We have a number of avid hikers and nature photographers here at Trinity. We have a number of folks who love taking care of animals and have a partnership with Stargazing Farm, which is an end-of-life refuge for animals. We have people who are always asking me for book recommendations, so I'm really glad that she'll be able to help you with that. So it just feels like there's some great resonances with the things you do for fun and who Trinity is as a congregation.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So I know this is an awkward question because you won't be here to see it fulfilled, but what are your hopes for Trinity in this next season?
My hopes for you all. I hope that you all are able to emerge from the pandemic and discover that there is just an enormous amount of life and joy on the other side. I hope we all feel that, right? As we come out of this time, and I hope that we come out of it together. Something like a pandemic can scatter us, or it can unite us, just as all sort of crises do. And my hope is that the pandemic unites you all as a congregation. And I also hope that it continues to give you freedom and creativity and innovation to do things the way we've never done them before, right? When the pandemic came, we didn't have a choice. We had never had worship on Zoom before, but nobody could say, well, we've never done it this way, because we didn't have a choice. And we discovered some really creative, delightful ways of being together throughout these 2 years. And so I hope that you continue to take that creativity and innovation and joyful playfulness that is in your bones and figure out how to use that to really connect with the wider Germantown world. People are thirsty for spirituality. They're looking for friendships and connections. And I like to say that Trinity has a good vibe. It was here before I got here, and it will be here after I'm gone.
Amen.
That vibe is in you, it is with you, and I just can't wait to see it flourish as we all emerge.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your household.
So, as many of you have probably already heard, I live in Annandale, Virginia, to which I'm sure you said, where's Annandale? Annandale is just west of Tyson's Corner in Virginia. We live there because my husband works at the Pentagon. So up until this point, we've actually had pretty equal commutes. Mine is about 20 minutes to Kensington. His is about 20 minutes to the Pentagon. We live there with our special needs basset hound, Louise, and 2 very feisty cats, Gracie and Vinny, and of course, whatever fosters are there this week. We're also both privileged to live close to our siblings. My younger sister, Laurel, lives in Reston. My husband's twin brother lives in Great Falls with his partner. So we are blessed to be surrounded not only with ones we love, but in a good community. And I'm sure a question that has already come up for you, some of you at this point is, so when are you moving? And the answer is not yet. What we're going to do is take 6 months or so to kind of feel out the commute and see just how bad it is, because unfortunately, with one of us working in Maryland and one of us working in Virginia, somebody's going to have a bad commute. So we're going to take the next 6 months to decide who that person is. And once we have decided it's my husband, you see why I didn't bring him today. Once we have decided it's Andrew, we will probably be looking for some place in the Silver Spring area, maybe a little bit north of there, so we can kind of split the difference. But it is my hope, at least, to be fully part of life here at Trinity. I'm long used to a commute to my church, and you'll find that despite that commute, I tend to show up at least 10 minutes early for everything. So don't worry about anything having to be a long distance for me. We will make it happen. This is part of my call and part of the work. I'm sure many of you commute into DC or into Virginia, so it's no different for me than it is for you, except I'm going against traffic.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Bonnie, what's next for you?
Yeah, so I've shared a little bit about my plans for the future with Trinity. I've really it was 20 years ago I heard my call to be a pastor, and now I'm hearing what I call a calling within a calling. I've always had this dream of having a woodworking church. So I used to go visit my grandpa at his retirement community, and they had a communal wood shop where all of the old retired, mostly men, would have workbenches, and they would share all the big equipment. And it was just like my grandpa went every day to work with his hands and be in the community of other people. And this was just my favorite place in the world. And there are so many resonances between woodworking and church, the least of which is Jesus was a carpenter of some kind. So I want to work toward that dream of being able to plant some kind of woodworking church or woodworking ministry. But first I feel like I need to go and really learn the craft of woodworking, more specifically furniture making. So I've been accepted into a 3-month program at the Austin School of Furniture that starts May 2nd. So in the short term, I'm going to go to Austin and spend every day in a communal wood shop. There are 12 students, which feels like a very biblical, holy number to me. And then I'll come back to this area. I'm hoping to be able to keep my preaching skills sharp and do some substitute preaching for pastors going on Sabbath leave or maternity leave or vacation or something like that. I hope to be building furniture. And as some of you know, I'm also getting married in October, so I think
that's not a small undertaking at all.
To do as well. But my hope, I'm going to be a pastor forever, and my hope is to take a church again sometime in the next few years, whether it's a church of my own making or an existing church that is interested in doing some kind of woodworking ministry. That's my plan.
Awesome.
Do you have any kind of favorite go-to images of God?
Yes, absolutely. Did you guys preach on the mother hen passage last week?
Nope.
Okay. So there's a beautiful image in Luke where Jesus says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you under my wings as a hen does her chicks." And that, for me, is a really powerful image of God as not only protector, but also liberator. When we're under the shelter of something stronger than us, we are able to thrive in a way that we often aren't when we're out on our own. And that's really hard for some of us in the DC area to hear, because we tend to be very type A, driven, I got this sort of folk. But I love the image of God as a watchful guide and guardian who helps us to grow. My personal favorite of the Trinity, if you're allowed to have that, is definitely the Holy Spirit. The first image of the Holy Spirit is in Genesis 1, where it says God's face, this great wind, was over the waters. And I love that this first image we get of the Holy Spirit is of her over the waters stirring things up. There's such truth and contrast between those two images of God. We get this beautiful one that Jesus offers to us in Luke, and then this very first image of the Trinity working to create and to make new things. Those are definitely my primary ones. I could talk for hours about that, but I assume you guys want to eat lunch at some point. I'm curious, as I think about that, I think about how God has changed me over the years, from that first calling of ministry at 15 to 20 years later, sitting here in front of you. And I'm curious, Bonnie, how has being the pastor of Trinity Church changed you?
Well, you've certainly given me a deep appreciation for coffee hour. Okay, here's a story. So one time I took the confirmation class over to Hap and Sharon Bauer's place, beloved saints of this church who have moved to Virginia over the last year. Hap was not actually his name. He's just so happy all the time that he was given the name Hap as a little boy, and it stuck. And we were taking the youth on a hike, and Hap said to all of the youth, he said, find a stick, find a walking stick. I want every single one of you to go find a walking stick. So the kids all went, and they kind of grabbed a walking stick, and then he comes up to them and he says in this kind of like delightful little way, he says, I know you all are young, and you don't need a walking stick, but hiking is better with a walking stick. And in the same way, you don't need to have a relationship with God to get through this life, but it's better with one. Mm. And I think, you know, we can get through our days without a faith community, but what Trinity has taught me is that it's so much better with a faith community. We're so much better with each other. Mm. Thank you. All right, one last question for you.
All right.
Is purple your favorite color?
So, yes, it is one of my favorite colors. I began a practice early in the pandemic when we were all worshiping remotely and couldn't really see anything about here. I started thinking, oh, what can I do to kind of bring joy to this experience of being in worship in little boxes? And I confess I grew up in a household where I had the lightest blonde hair you could possibly want as a teenager, and my mother never let me do anything to it because I had this perfect hair, and she would never let me touch it. So I decided that this was the perfect opportunity to do something fun and unusual. So for Lent that year, I dyed my hair purple. Purple is the liturgical color of Lent. That's why we're both wearing purple stoles today. And I wasn't quite sure what to expect. My congregation's a little older. I wasn't sure what they would think of seeing their pastor with purple hair. And it turned out it brought them as much joy as it brought me. So it's a thing that I have continued to occasionally do. My typical hair color is more of a copper blonde now than what you're currently seeing. But I have done blue hair for Advent, and I did a brief experiment with green hair for ordinary time, and that's not coming back. Mostly because it doesn't wash out. If you are blonde and you put green in your hair, it's there forever. So you will from time to time see more unusual hair colors on me, but really it's a practice that I think brings joy. It's joyful for me when I get to look at this weird hair that I now have it was all I ever wanted as a teenager. But it also brings joy to others, I think, to see different ways that we can embody the joy of our faith. So,
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
I do have one more question, but if it's okay, I'd like to ask you all and have them answer during coffee hour. So, as we mentioned, I live in Virginia. Germantown, I grew up in Frederick, by the way, but most of my experience in Germantown has been driving through on 270. So I need some help getting to know this area. So what I hope you will tell me during coffee hour as I meet each of you is what your favorite place is in this town. Is it a restaurant? Is it a particularly great place to hang out? Is it a park? Whatever your favorite place is that's maybe not your house, because I know we've all spent a lot of time in our homes during COVID. But what's your favorite part of this community? Where do you go that makes this place feel special and feel like home? That's what I would love to know from each of you. And then I will have a wonderful intro list to get me started as I get to know this area come summer. Would that be okay? Wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for giving us this time to do this. And think we're going to stand now and sing a closing hymn.
If you'll please pick up those red